I think the most pressing question that we have before us today is, why am I here? Seemed like a good idea at the time. But the truth is that David Lang has a silver tongue, as you've all heard, and he persuaded me to come to lend some balance, and I will try and do that, but I think, unfortunately, you're going to find that we're not always going to be disagreeing on a lot of things. On the most recent fair use issues, for example, I'm described in some of the programs as an industry representative. The industry really has no view on this. There are copyright owners on every side of these battles. So don't think that this is something where it's quite clear that copyright owners or the record labels, for example, are knee-jerk protectionists on this sort of thing. They're the ones who get in trouble when somebody samples. So they want fair use right to sampling just as much as they want to sometimes protect their rights when somebody else samples against them. So it's a very tough issue. And I don't think the artists community is any different. I don't remember the early sampling cases, but if I recall, it started with artists, not with labels. It was artists who were really bringing those cases. Hey, man, that was my riff. And the fact that... Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the artist community can be just as proprietary as the corporate, greedy labels, media moguls, and everybody else. So we shouldn't simplify these issues and think that fair use on the one hand and protection on the other is the difference between creator and corporate owner. So we should be careful about that. Although I'm not an industry representative on these issues, I will try and give you some perspective of where the industry stands and what it thinks about a lot of the issues that you've got. And because of the issues that have been raised about public domain and so on and so forth, I thought I should at least deal with the canard that record companies, for example, are really not interested in the Internet, that they really want to close it down, they want to close down competition on the Internet, they just want to go back to a world of CDs where they can just make their dinosaur profits. And that just is not the reality. You've got to understand that for the last 50 years, record companies have never dealt directly with their consumers. They deal through intermediaries. They sell their product through retailers. They market their products through radio stations. They've never had a one-to-one connection. We've discovered a long time ago that the reason that the next album of a band doesn't sell is that no one knew it came out. Well, all of a sudden you have an opportunity, if you know who's actually buying your products, to send them an email letting them know that the band has come out with a new album. Or that, you know, the band is touring in your city. Or that there's some other artist like that band that you might enjoy. So there are so many opportunities. You can email samples from the new album. The promotional opportunities of the Internet are enormous. But then, of course, comes the new delivery mechanisms. The notion of downloading music directly to consumers day or night changes completely the way that the business can operate. It opens up the marketplace. You know, the big labels have been a mass market phenomenon. No question about it. They need to sell a lot of discs in order to make the investment worthwhile. But if you have the Internet, being able to find those customers, being able to find the niche audience for the smaller artist, then suddenly you can make a living off small artists as well as big artists because you can find the fans wherever they are in the country. And it becomes commercially feasible to expand a small band into a large band just because of the Internet. Then there's the catalog. All that music that has been sitting back in dusty vaults, unusable, because it just didn't make economic sense to press it, warehouse it, ship it, you know, 1 or 2 albums to thousands and thousands of record stores around the country. Well, all of a sudden, all of that becomes available again and becomes a source of revenue for labels and for artists. You can start changing the packaging of your music. We've been selling CDs. They all have 12 or 13 songs or whatever. Well, now you can sell singles, 2, 3, 5, all sorts of different opportunities, compilations. And what kind of download are you going to do? It could be a permanent download where it's just like selling a CD, but it could also be a temporary download. It could be something where you don't get it forever, but it's limited in time. You have a party on Saturday night, you can rent 1,000 songs that will be available in your house over the weekend, and all of a sudden you've got an entirely new kind of transaction between labels and consumers. We've had, really, when you think about it, such a limited offering in terms of the way that we've been able to sell our product. You just put it on discs, and either it sells or it doesn't, and that's it. All of that changes. And then there's streaming. You have real-time transmission of music, so it can be listened to while it's being retransmitted, or you can, and the way that you can do that streaming would be everything from artist channels to genre channels to music on demand, being able to pick exactly what you want to hear when you want to hear it. And you can pay for it by the listen, you could pay for it by the song, or you can do the all-you-can-eat subscription models that everybody's been thinking about in terms of these new opportunities. And you might be able to get that for free if you want to pay, if you want to listen to ads, or think about the ability to, when you hear something you like, be able to click on the buy button and get it downloaded to you right away. And then when wireless actually comes along, and all of a sudden you're buying a copy for the server in your basement that serves up the entire house, I think people are going to begin to consume music in entirely new ways. Now, why do I mention all of this? It's not just to make clear that there are really enormous opportunities presented by the internet and that labels have every reason to pursue those opportunities, but also to remind you of the benefits of digital delivery. They are going to expand consumer choice. We're going to have an extraordinary array of new transactions between creators and consumers. And I do say creators, not just the labels, because creators can do this themselves if they want. There's going to be no limit here on who's going to own the rights and be able to deliver this stuff. Everybody will have equal access to the internet. But here's the real point, and that is that security is the other side of these new business opportunities. Without security, a lot of those new consumer offerings just won't be possible. If you can email a song to somebody to expose somebody to a new band, and that email then becomes permanent, that is that you can keep the song without it timing out, and people aren't going to use that new promotional vehicle. If you can rent 1,000 songs for a weekend, but come Monday, it's still there for you to keep forever, that model disappears. If somebody's going to invest the time and money to start a new subscription service, but you can't control access, it doesn't work. So security is just not the enemy of fair use and the public domain, any more than security guards are the enemy of shopping. I just think that we have to begin to look at this in a little bit different way. Now, you're undoubtedly going to ask, what about the impact of technical security measures on reasonable and established instances of fair use? And I completely agree that these are reasonable issues. Excerpting, criticism, collage. I wonder, frankly, why that question is so urgent right now, because these issues weren't raised when premium cable began scrambling. Nobody was complaining that that meant the end of fair use for motion pictures. People accepted it as a reasonable means of ensuring that there was going to be a limitation on access. But it is a question that's very much in the public right now, and I think it's a question that remains to be answered over time because the answer just isn't clear yet. We're all still finding our way. I have no doubt that fair use interests will be fully protected. We're in a transition now, and I think we will be for years to come because, let's face it, the digital revolution is really a digital evolution. This is going to take a long time to move from one market to another. It's one of the reasons that labels have to be very careful about how they do this. Their core business still is the sale of physical product. 99% of their stuff is sold in physical product. they can't cannibalize and destroy that sales base by completely revaluing the proposition on the internet in a way that destroys the retailer. But CDs are going to be around for a long time to come, as are cassettes, as are print copies and journal copies and all the kinds of things by which all this stuff will continue to be available. And it makes you wonder why there would be, therefore, a limitation on fair use if, in fact, these other means of providing the content are available. The other point, of course, is that IP owners have never made any money by locking up their content. If they don't make it available, they don't earn any revenues. And believe it or not, I actually have faith in future technical measures. I think that a lot of the things that people are talking about are going to enable all kinds of fair use implementations that will make sure that all sorts of personal uses will be preserved, while you'll be able to at least prevent the internet distribution problem that has really plagued the industry. And I think that all of that is in the future and coming. The other thing, of course, is how do you offer all these opportunities? How do you justify the investment in these opportunities if you're competing with free? How do you deal with this if you're dealing not just with people, individuals taking stuff, but businesses that are financed by venture capitalists for the purpose of giving away other people's property? In other words, how can you not sue Napster? If you can't stand for the proposition that the wholesale appropriation is infringement, then what's left? And I think it's important to distinguish in David Lang's article from appropriation art versus appropriation. And a lot of what we've been talking about today has been appropriation art. And I think the test for appropriation art necessarily has to be completely different from that of wholesale appropriation. We have attempted to really focus on those businesses. We have not gone after consumers. And believe me, we are well aware of the fact that by bringing a lawsuit against Napster, you are pissing off the very people who are your best customers. Believe me, we are aware of that. But what do? You take the risk of pissing them off and allowing businesses to realize that Napster was being offered for $2 billion. It was a $13 million investment by the venture capital firm, and they were about to turn it around for a $2 billion investment. Fortunately, some people thought there were some legal issues here, and maybe they shouldn't make the investment. But the fact is that people were going to capitalize on giving away other people's property. That just has to have profound implications for the way that the intellectual property community can operate in the future. We have also attempted to be very balanced in the way that we deal with asking others to help. We have not asked ISPs, for example, to deal with, to take down consumers who are using file sharing networks or anything like that. You have heard that a bunch of people in the entertainment industry have been doing that. We have not, because we recognize that it would just be unseemly to say that just because some 10-year-old kid is using Nutella in his bedroom, that household should lose internet access. Obviously, there are a lot of things that have to be done here to figure out how to find this balance. We really don't know yet how all that will be worked out. But this is a long-term proposition. We are just at the beginning of this digital revolution. And I think we're going to be in this together for the long term. So I say, let's wait and see, let's work, let's dialogue, and let's try and find the common ground that actually advances everybody's interest as we go forward. Thanks. Yes.
You've mentioned that you can see some prospect that technical mechanisms could guarantee fair use. And we've just heard from David Nimmer what astonishingly complex and unpredictable notion fair use is. Can you give us any idea what you have in mind here? Because I haven't the slightest idea what might possibly guarantee fair use.
I think that's a fair question, and let me comment on that, the general point about fair use. I completely agree with David Lang that the existing fair use regime is a nightmare. I mean, it is an unfortunate situation that you have to be a copyright lawyer to even begin to think through whether something might be a fair use analysis, and even then you have no idea what a court is actually going to decide. And it is unfortunate, therefore, that fair use determinations are really left to the legal circles and the judges rather than more clearly identified for the people who actually want to take advantage of it. That doesn't mean that I agree with everything in David's paper about what that new test should be, and frankly I thought that David's paper still left other questions, which is, at what point was this really considered a transformative use and so on and so forth, because one thing that we've learned over the last few years, I assure you, is that there are any number of people willing to push the envelope of all the legal issues that are out there, and that no matter what kind of copyright exception might be put forward, no matter how well-intentioned, it will be taken to its extreme in defense of unreasonable positions. And I think that Mark pushing the envelope is a rather different type of issue, because that is, at least to me, truly transformative art, which raises an entirely different set of questions than the wholesale appropriation that we've been facing on the Internet. So, how do you do fair use in that context? I can't deal with that issue in terms of collages and so on and so forth, although, as I said, there's no doubt in my mind that there are always going to be ways. You didn't have to worry about getting the DVD version of Little Mermaid, which is encrypted, in order to make your stuff. There were plenty of opportunities for you to get Little Mermaid in many different ways, so you'd be able to exercise any fair use privilege you may have. But in addition, you can actually, for example, if you want owners, if you want people who purchase a piece of music, to be able to use it for personal devices and so on and so forth, but not be able to put it up on the Internet. There would be ways to tether it to either a machine or to a series of machines in a household. You're shaking your head, but why do you think that these technologies are not possible?
I mean, that would be predicated on something like SSSCF. I mean, because that sort of hardware platform tying is only possible if you have that sort of strong authentication bound to the hardware.
It would be great if there actually was going to be a magic bullet that did all that, but the reality is that that's not going to happen. Let's be realistic. We spent many years in SDMI, the Secure Digital Music Initiative, trying to establish a common ground in order to find ways to allow personal use but not Internet piracy. And although there were definitely differences between the content industries and the CE and IT industries and all the other industries in terms of what their objectives were, we were actually able to find common ground. We really were. What we couldn't find was the technology. We couldn't find a technology that actually would do the trick, that was actually going to be responsive to the different needs of the different communities. That's one of the reasons why there's no magic bullet. The IT needs, a computer can have a processor that can do identification systems and so on that requires incredible processing power. But when you try and put that same thing on a wireless cell phone, and you think of what the impact would be on the battery life of that if you used the same technology, it becomes unavailable as a technology. So we just couldn't find that common technology or one that was sufficiently robust to actually make a difference. It just wasn't going to be worth the effort. Yes? Okay. You pick one.
How does this music become your property? Good question.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question. What do you mean, how does music become your property?
I think it's quite straightforward. How does this music become your property?
Who's me?
Well, you talk about we, so I'm assuming the recording industry. How does it become your property?
By contracts with artists.
Fair contract. Not unfair bargaining contracts.
They're standard.
Well, I'd be happy to address that issue if you like. It's certainly far afield from the subject of fair use. But, it's up to you as to whether you want to spend the time on it.
It's actually up to you. If you're willing to take this on for a few more minutes, we can do that. But I think maybe we ought to close this off in couple of 3 minutes and let Rosemary answer that.
Okay. There's definitely issues about bargaining relationships between artists and labels, no question about it. It's received a lot of press, will continue to receive a lot of press. We can try and legislate away the economics of a marketplace, but the fact of the matter is, new artists have very little bargaining power. Established artists have an unbelievable amount of bargaining power. Established artists can get unbelievable advances. New artists get lower advances. The whole economics of this industry is unusual. I've found that the entertainment industry tends to be bound with its culture. There are certain ways that things develop, and the lawyers on both sides have an established way of doing something. They simply add to contracts. They never change them. So, for example, you have packaging deductions that were started when things were broken, and the royalty rates were established on that basis, and that system just continues. Now, you could do away with a lot of that stuff and just have a lower royalty rate, but nobody wants it. The artist doesn't want it, the manager doesn't want it, the lawyer for the artist doesn't want it, because then it looks like they didn't get a good deal. So the systems perpetuate themselves. But a lot of the system of this industry is based on advances. You pay as much money, an artist will get as much money up front as possible, because that way the artist has transferred the risk of failure to the record company. Alan Grubman once said that if an artist of mine ever receives a dime in royalties, I have failed. I think that reflects the way that the system works in terms of negotiating. It's just the way, it's just the reality of the economics of the business.
I think we'll stop here just for the moment. Thanks, Cary, very much. So you may ask any question of any member of the panel you like, and when that 4 minutes is up, we'll leave. Joe Hyman.
I'd like to
ask a question both Cary, Sherman, and Mark also you answered the wrong question throughout most of your, or at least you answered one criticism, you're not interested in either. Towards the end, you got to a different criticism that I think is a criticism that is closer to cluster of writing that people in this room have written, and I'd be interested to see what you think about it. So you were asked, why do you have property? You said, well, that's just the way how things are. You were asked, is it fair and moral? You said, well, reality has been such that the industry hasn't been too fair to most artists, but that's the way things have been. And about 2 minutes before that, you said you can't legislate the market away. But the arguments that have been made have been that, in fact, technology is changing the market. And what is happening to the distributor vis-a-vis you, the meters are leaving and suddenly creating relationships, is in fact, if the technology were left alone, happening to you. So the problem isn't that you're legislating the market away, it's that you're trying to legislate the market into being, so that it doesn't change from what it is now, where you can have these historical, morally unfortunate, but nonetheless historical market conditions. So the story that's told instead is that if you would just get out of the way with your laws, artists would have relationships with their audience. They would live off relationships with their audience, and you would go and do something else. That, I didn't hear an answer to that argument, which seems to me to be the more salient. And I suppose the question to Mark is that a plausible story from your view of art and art?
Oh, that's brilliantly put, and kind of relates to what I wanted to ask Cary too, is, what behind closed doors, does anyone in the RA say, what happens if we can't figure out how to make this new medium work the way we're used to? What if it just never works? And for me, I understand, you make a living. People have families. They want to have, it's very basic. It's survival. People just want to, keep paying those bills. But when all the things I have seen of how the treatment between business and artists in the music industry is so vile that I just feel no sympathy for the victimized cries coming from the industry of, oh God, we've got to make this thing work the same way we're used to and keep making money off you people out there. And I don't, in some, in an individual sense, yep, you want to keep your job, you want to have your house, but in some, in another perspective, I don't have a lot of sympathy for it. It's like, so it's going to change.
May I just say that the time is now up, and you don't have to.
No, but I really.
I really didn't want to leave the impression that I thought that artists have been treated unfairly. I just said that the economics of the marketplace is that there are different types of relationships at different points in time. Believe me, if you talk to labels, they will tell you how they can be victimized by superstars just the way young artists will tell you how they have been victimized by labels. It's a very divergent marketplace out there, so I just wanted to correct that.
But that's such a tiny percentage of the people out there who are making music. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure what you mean by legislate a market into being, because we really haven't.
If you don't force technology not to hack, if you don't force the server to comply with the software, if you don't force technology to develop in a way that allows you to continue to sell music that's contained and paid for as a good, that model will decline.
But we have actually not attempted to legislate that. The only legislation that we supported on this was the DMCA in terms of Wait a minute. No, there are a lot of other provisions. There are a lot of other legal regimes out there that are being proposed that go well beyond the DMCA in terms of making technology subservient to content. And the DMCA as the only thing that we supported in terms of saying that if you have an effective measure on its own, that you shouldn't be able to sell products to break that system, we don't think is a bad piece of legislation. We think that DVD, for example, became a market that consumers love because it had some encryption. Motion picture studios felt comfortable putting it out. It's illegal to break the system. How it applies in the DCSS case, I know, very complicated set of issues for First Amendment and all that. But in terms of saying that if you're going to have to rely on technical protection measures in order to create marketplaces in an uncontrolled technology world, it is not unreasonable to have some limit on breaking, on circumventing the technology. But we have not attempted in any way to control the technologies. We haven't said that any technologies should be illegal. We haven't suggested that the marketplace should be subservient to the content. The problem is companies are trying to launch legitimate businesses into a marketplace where technology can supersede anything that they do. And the only way that they're going to be able to do it ultimately, I think, is to offer better consumer value, a more compelling market opportunity that is going to drive people to the legitimate marketplace instead of the underground marketplace. That's a very tough thing to sell. It's going to be tough to do. But this is not a matter of trying to get legislation to protect the interests. The companies understand that the reality is the reality, and they're just going to have to adapt the business models. And the business models are going to adapt throughout the industry. You talk about artists going directly to the Internet. That's fine. I think that's one of the things that will help level the playing field in this marketplace. A number of the artists who have already gone directly to the Internet have not found it a very satisfying experience because one of the things that record companies do is market and promote artists. They help distinguish the wheat from the chaff. And that makes a big difference to artists who want that particular role of record companies. But artists who don't want it will have that freedom. Everybody will have the freedom to choose what they want. Record companies are not the only ones who can be disintermediated here. The retailers are worried about being disintermediated as well. Disintermediation is in the eye of the beholder. Who is being disintermediated? Record companies may just become different. They may perform marketing and promotion functions but not distribution functions. But there will always be that function being served, that's for sure. And I don't know whether they'll be called record companies or whatever, but it will change. And the relationship between artists and labels is going to change. Right now, artists and labels have a relationship on one thing, the sale of CDs. And that's why record companies feel like they are very generous to artists. They pay them money in order to create CDs that they go out and market and promote at great expense, and then the CDs can be ripped off freely, whether on the Internet or elsewhere, but the artist makes all the money and keeps all the money from the touring, the merchandising, the publishing, the endorsements, the rest of the career. You know, a better model would probably be where they were true partners in all the revenue sources and they had common interests. It hasn't been so far, but I think all of that will change over time. I think we're just going to have to see how this marketplace evolves.
That's it. Thank you very much.